Greetings, you accursed. Recording the pod one day late this week, Tuesday morning, just a few hours after the Liberals go down to defeat in the Toronto St. Paul's massacre. A 2-point margin isn't a lot, but in that riding, it's a goddamn massacre for the Liberals. Kory Teneycke is with me, Scott Reid is with me, and Jordan Leichnitz is with me. I'm David Herle. Here's the show. Conservative Don Stewart has flipped the 30-year Liberal stronghold of Toronto St. Paul's. Omens, portents, consequences. We'll talk about it all. Our cursed clipping this week is from the Canadian Press. Chrystia Freeland has announced she's investigating a surtax on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Then it's Naheed Nenshi in a landslide. He's the new first ballot leader of the Alberta NDP, but can he ride that momentum to a defeat of Danielle Smith? Finally, Gordon Pinsent closes the show with our Hey Yous. Jordan, Scott, Kory, I guess we should talk about the hockey game, and a test about the size of this game will be, Jordan, did you watch?
I did. I caught the last part of it, yes. And I had feelings, which I think is what you're supposed to have when you're watching hockey. So it was good. It was quite a game. And I think, although I think maybe Paul Maurice was the real winner, actually, in the end.
I hear he gave a good speech. I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was really good. It was, it gave me emotional closure, anyhow. It was very, very classy.
Scott, they picked the wrong guy for the Conn Smythe. I mean, I'm as huge a Connor McDavid fan as anybody, but obviously the person that won that series for Florida was the goalie, Bobrovsky. One goal last night.
And we had this discussion last night. So David and I go to see the Afghan Wigs play, and there's only like 250 people there when we walk in, which is a little disappointing, humbling for a band that we consider to be great. And then we go and we watch the last two periods of the game, and of course Edmonton loses. And then I shuffle home, and I go, well, at least Leslie's looks like she's got this in the bag. And then I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, well, there's literally nothing fucking good about yesterday. But yeah, I'm with you.
There is no joy in
McDavid.
There is no joy in Mudville anywhere, except for the only good thing that's going right in the world, I have to say, Saskatchewan Roughriders are 3-0. 3-0, laid such a beating on the Hamilton Tiger Cats last weekend that it violated some elements of the Geneva Convention. So I'm living through with that. But anyway, let's get to the real shit. Kory, you called this by-election result last week. Right on CTV question period, we were on the show together, and I heard you say that the Conservatives were going to win this seat. The people that are officially involved with the Conservatives were not saying that, but you were saying that. What were you considering? What were you seeing that made you think that would happen?
Well, I think it was setting up to be a referendum on Trudeau, which is what I think it was. And I just so many anecdotal stories from people door knocking and other things in the riding where people who were lifelong Liberals saying, yeah, but Trudeau. And I think people wanted to send a message. They wanted to send a message on him. I think it was a very personal message. And I'll say that because the Conservatives are only up about 6 points in Ontario from where they were in the last two election campaigns. Yet they changed their margin in this particular riding by, depending on which race you're looking at, over time, 2 to 3 times that amount. So it's not just that the Conservatives are doing better, and they're doing better in Ontario. But the margin on this was an absolute blowout, and a lot of the anecdotal stuff that you were hearing was this is a shove towards the door for Justin Trudeau from Liberal voters, long-time Liberal voters, in a very safe Liberal seat. So I thought they'd have it. I think that the size of Jewish population in the riding I thought that would help as well, and I'm sure it probably did. But the other big surprising thing is very high voter turnout, like 45% almost people showed up. That's massive. Like most by-elections, it's 25. Very significant turnout in that riding. So there's a message there, and it's written in neon fucking font.
The turnout's interesting. The turnout's interesting, Kory, because, and if I'm wrong, any of the three of you can correct me, I don't think the Conservatives wanted to win the seat because they want Trudeau to stay. And so I don't think they wanted to win and create a situation where he might leave. So I bet that they didn't put the full weight of their organization behind that effort. I bet they didn't apply the full Jenny Byrne turnout machine to St. Paul's last night, and they still got it.
Even the candidate, not necessarily as a rock star. Like, it's not, when you look at like some of the people who've been the Conservative candidate when they've done better, like it was Barbara McDougall's old seat. Yeah. You know, that Isabel Bassett run there. Like, you know, when the Conservatives have done better, they've had, you know, master of the universe size candidates who've come in who are, you know, going to bend the curve on the vote to some degree. No knock on Don Stewart. Like, I'm sure he's an incredibly capable guy and a hardworking candidate and all the good things you can say about somebody. But his name recognition, I'm going to guess, was as close to zero as you can get without going lower.
Yeah. Jordan, it was a bad night for the confidence and supply agreement generally, because the NDP vote is down as much as the Liberal vote is down. They're both down about 7 points from their 2021 number. Yeah. So that's a fairly clear message of change and of where the NDP and the Liberals are both seen as positioned on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no question this was positioned really, this was a two-way race. It was a referendum on Trudeau. So I'm not terribly surprised to see a low NDP number. And I think it's fair to say that they didn't throw their full machine at it either. And this riding, you know, the NDP's actually never come second there, not even in 2011. So it's not the friendliest of terrain. But I do think, yeah, I mean, those numbers are not great for New Democrats. And I know that I know they're smarting a bit this morning from it as well, because it really shows a lot of the danger of what happens when it does become a referendum on Trudeau. And if he sticks around, then this is the dynamic that we're looking to see replicated in the general. So I do think that it maybe does create a bit of a push factor in that sense. And for New Democrats who are thinking about the future of the confidence and supply agreement over the summer, this is an important data point. So I think that folks should be taking that on board and absolutely reading into it, maybe more than pundits would typically say.
Yeah. Scott, you've been around the Liberal Party for 100 years. What are the ramifications of this result inside the party?
I don't think that we can exaggerate or overstate how significant last night's loss was. Like, I know people are prone to overstatement, overanalysis, breathless hyperbole. I don't think you can get too breathless about this. I mean, it's fundamentally going to shift the face and the outlook for federal politics and provincial politics. I mean, like Kory's buddy is talking about going early to get ahead of a Poilievre election. You can goddamn well bet they're paying close attention to the result last night. Olivia Chow, what's she thinking? She's thinking in Toronto. Well, I got a partner on housing and infrastructure funding and the federal government. Guess I better start looking through my Rolodex for conservative context. Like, the whole world starts to look at you like you are in the past tense, like you are drenched in loss and overness. And so it's just such a profound shift that's happened. There's no denying it. Liberals have been saying, how frustrated have you and I been, David, when we hear people say to our faces, no one's tuned in, right? Like people haven't started to really imagine the choice yet. They're not paying attention to politics. This is parking lot time for people. It's like, really? Well, that is no longer
available. They've already decided and they're waiting.
Yes.
They're not parked. They're waiting.
This was a group of people who wanted to send a message.
Yeah. But this is
key. And the call's coming from inside the house.
Yeah, that is exactly right, Jordan. Well said. The call is coming from inside the house. Like, this is a rejection of Liberals of Trudeau. Like, yes. And no question. I don't think you can focus the attention on that point enough. Like,
it goes back to what you said.
It is about Trudeau.
It goes back to what you said in your Hey You at the end of last week's episode, David. I mean, it is now the mirage that people aren't paying attention, that they haven't come to a decision, that they haven't rendered a verdict on this government and this prime minister. They have, and they made it plain last night in stark, historic terms. So it goes back to what you said last week. which is the Prime Minister has a couple of options now. The status quo is unavailable. That mirage is shattered. So now it's change. What is that change? How will it manifest itself? Do you rip up the CNS agreement? Do you step aside as leader? Do you call a snap election? Obviously you wouldn't do that. But the trajectory of this government must alter. Do you go back and say, you know what, a consumer carbon tax, people have rendered their verdict just as surely as they did in St. Paul's. We have to revisit that core, fundamental, defining feature of our agenda. Everything must be on the table because it's change or die. That's the fundamental.
I have a bold prediction.
But
I
the
don't
problem
think he's
is
going to change a thing.
Yeah, no, that feels right. And anyway, it probably wouldn't work anyway because they're now in a situation, and this is where yesterday, as a graphic illustration of their unpopularity, it's not a poll, it's an actual people went out and voted, is that every single thing they do from now till the election campaign will be judged on whether it is going to help them politically or not. They will not be able to introduce a policy and have a real debate about the merits of the policy because all anybody will be saying is, well, obviously they're trying to do this to win. Is it going to help them win or is it not going to help them win? So they're just now in a completely cynical frame for anything that they try to do now.
And people, and we've said this a million times, Kory said this in particular, people don't want to hear from the messenger, i.e. the Prime Minister, but it's more than that. Last night also demonstrates that people want their pound of flesh from him. It's just a devastating dynamic. If we as a thought exercise try to imagine a circumstance that would alter this field of gravity, I don't know that we could. It's just that difficult. So you think to yourself, what options are available to the Prime Minister? And we've now moved. For a long time, they've tried to comfort themselves by saying, well, all this exists in the realm of political opinion. That's your opinion. That's how you see it. No, last night transformed it. It's no longer a political opinion. It is now a cold, hard, votes counted in the ballot box reality. They got to come to grips with it. They have to face up to it. There's no avoiding it now.
Yeah, and that's the situation when you've got 18 cabinet ministers that are going to come and door knock in your riding. And when you've got the full data sciences machine grinding away, trying to find every Liberal vote there is and pull it out. In a general, you're not going to have that. You're just going to be out there on your own.
And yet, likely with full knowledge of what the potential outcome was, the Prime Minister was on David Cochran's show last week saying that people aren't in decision mode. This is not a guy who is open to hearing this information, right?
That fucking line makes me insane. It makes me so angry.
It's
such a surrender of...
Your anger is what Liberal voters were obviously expressing, Scott. But
they had a ready target by having a candidate who was so closely tied to Freeland, who is so closely tied to Trudeau. The Liberals served up the opportunity to send a message on a platter.
Well, Leslie Church was running as fast as she could away from the Trudeau brand all campaign from everything I saw. So I don't agree there's nothing that they can do. I think there's nothing they can do while Trudeau's there. I think there's nothing they can do if he stays. But I think there's lots of things that they have a chance of doing, at least if he goes. And I'll point out again, as I have many times around this, Kim Campbell started the 93 campaign at 43%. And Brian Mulroney was about half as popular as Justin Trudeau. Half. So,
Turner had a lead in 84, too, against Mulroney to start. So, it does have that potential effect, but there also isn't likely to be, as it wasn't for those people, there's not going to be any runway.
Look, in 2014, Liberals were 15 points back from the PCs at the beginning of that. So sometimes leadership changes work.
Right.
One of the other things, and it's obvious, but it bears mentioning, just again to reinforce how altered the dynamic is this morning, now that you know something as opposed to think and speculate about something. And that is every single Liberal MP and candidate is looking at the result and they are thinking to themselves, Jesus fucking Christ, if St. Paul's ain't safe, I'm not safe. Nowhere is safe. And that dynamic, I don't think that manifests with a bunch of people signing a letter and trying to force the PM's hand, but it
I think they're more likely not to run than they are to fight.
That's right.
Yeah, I think people just fade into the woodwork.
And people whisper and they slink in the saddle. Like it just everything's changed now. Everything has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, everything's changed, I think, except the PM's outlook. I will be astonished. I think that they are just going to double down on the current strategy.
Speaking of strategies, let's look at the by-election strategy, right? So you're trying to motivate Liberals to come out and vote. And honest to God, why would they? They don't like the government any more than anybody else does, particularly. And it's not going to affect the strength of the government. They probably don't mind if the government sent a little bit of a message, and it's Monday night and the Game 7 of the Stanley Cup's on. Like, why the fuck would I go? Vote. So they tried to motivate people to vote, as near as I can tell from their messaging, with positive messaging about the government's record and certain elements of the government's record. If I saw childcare one more time on a Leslie Church document, right, I was going to scream. Why weren't they mobilizing Liberals in the riding to send a message to Poilievre? Why weren't they making it a reverse referendum? Why didn't they make it a reverse referendum as opposed to endorse us? Fuck that guy.
Because that's the only thing that could motivate. Because I don't think voters in
St. Paul's like Poilievre all that much. I think this riding probably goes Liberal in a general election, if there's a Liberal Party in the general election. But
like people don't want to hear that. Like, there's no, if you're going to make a referendum on leadership, you can't only include one leader. Like, and Leslie Church isn't the fucking leader. So, if you're going to have a leadership referendum, it involves your leader and their leader. And Poilievre wins that 10 times out of 10 and by margins that are considerable. So, like, I don't think that option is available to them. I think that option is available to them with just about any other candidate that they can think of, and especially if they're not particularly well known. The only one I would cross off that list is Freeland, because she is known and closely associated. Virtually no one outside of Quebec knows who Mélanie Joly is. Right. Dom LeBlanc cuts a wide swath in Ottawa, but nowhere else. Same with Sean Fraser. Same with, basically anyone else you could talk about. Carney would have more profile, but is not viewed as an insider, but not viewed as an insider in the party in the way that someone who's been serving in cabinet would be. So I think anybody else, there is okay. So who is this person? And then by contrast, who is Pierre Poilievre? Yeah. I think the Conservatives have done well by putting out positive advertising and stuff around Poilievre to soften his image a bit. But at the end of the day, in the fullness of the television cameras, that's when people will really start taking a look. And but only if Trudeau is gone. As long as Trudeau's there, well,
I think it's worse than that, actually, because it's clear that there is thought within the Liberal machine about the need to disqualify the Conservatives and to disqualify Poilievre as a leader. Otherwise, I can't imagine why every Liberal cabinet minister yesterday was out tweeting in sync about Arnold Viersen and abortion again. So there is a thought that work has to be done, but it hasn't been committed to by the party in paid advertising. It's not a cohesive strategy that's being seen through at every level of communications. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, but you can't just pick that up out of it. Like, you have to muscle that through.
What the fuck would make you think that an obscure tweet about a goddamn backbencher nobody's ever heard of on E-Day is going to have any impact on any fucking thing?
Like, so they have the thought, but the execution is beyond lacking, right? So I think, to Kory's point, that was going to be a race about leadership, no matter what you did. It was going to be a race about Trudeau. And so you could go in and make a negative case around Poilievre. That even though the Conservative numbers are up, it is not because of enthusiasm for this guy. It is because of fatigue and dislike of your guy. So you can go after him. He still has high negatives. There is an opening there. But none of that was done with any kind of a real push or a real attempt. So I actually don't know, because we can't say, because they never fucking tried it.
Well, my prediction, that will never work though, Jordan. That will never work as long as Trudeau is there. Like
I don't know. We'll never know. We'll never know.
Well, as handsome a man as he is, he's too ugly to win this beauty contest. That's for sure.
But that's probably right, and obviously that's one of the most profound implications of last night's result. Everybody is, and everybody will talk about his future and whether there's whether and how and when he's going to leave, but. I want to pick up your point, though, David, about what you were hearing from them, because I think it can get lost in the shuffle. Whether you agree with Kory or not that the message doesn't get through, it's still important to recognize that the message blows, right? So, like, their default position, other than as Jordan says, when they sort of spasm ineffectively something negative, and it is like a spasm. It's like a shitty tweet that's kind of dumb. It goes out, goes no place, just talking to themselves. Their default message offering is childcare, pharmacare. These are the things we're building, these foundations that will support you. That's our way into affordability. These things somehow, a roundabout way, take pressure off of you financially. It's bad messaging. It does not work. And that's something else they're going to have to come to grips with, which is the offering they're being told to peddle doesn't work. Yes, the messenger is obviously a challenge, and they're going to have to confront that, and the PM's going to have to confront that question now. You can't avoid it, but they've got to fix this too. Like, they are bullshitting themselves. There's been this delusion. People aren't focused yet. This is the message that we want. No, that's not the message you want, and people are focused. The whole delusion is over now.
They haven't wrestled with the question about how to talk about their own record when they view their record as laudable and voters feel differently. So asking for...
Yeah, but even if they were tied in the polls, like an incumbent government after a couple of terms, that length of time in office, if they were on the message they're on right now, they'd be in trouble anyway. Like I think whenever you're looking for a thank you instead of presenting something for your next mandate, you're in trouble. And even if it wasn't a change election, but voters don't give thank yous. Voters vote for things that you're promising to do going forward, not as a recognition of things you've done in the past. Like, look, remember a Democratic electorate voted Churchill out after winning the fucking war, which was a lot bigger than some piddly-ass dental program.
He had a right to be bitter about that, eh?
Yeah, I would think so.
Jesus.
Anyway, to lay this at the feet of the dental. That's a good one.
but it does draw a really dark underline under the point.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on. We've beaten this hard enough. Most of you hurly-burlyites know I worked for Paul Martin for 25 years. The first thing he talked to me about when I met him, equal opportunity for Indigenous people. It was a focus of his government, and he's continued his efforts long past his prime ministership. June is National Indigenous History Month, a time to honor and recognize the rich cultures, histories, and contributions of Indigenous peoples in Canada, so all Canadians can learn about and appreciate the diverse traditions, languages, and experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, not only believes in that, they act on it. They were the first technology company to formalize a commitment through their Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan, built in full partnership with Indigenous peoples, guided by their voices, and committed to progressing the path of reconciliation in a deeply meaningful way. Embedded here is this idea that as technology progresses to levels most of us couldn't even contemplate a few years ago, TELUS will advance their commitment to reconciliation with every new step. And so they've just declared they will not use artificial intelligence technology to create or replicate the art or imagery of Indigenous peoples. These are the tenets of their pledge. TELUS is proud to support the artistic practices of Indigenous peoples and fully recognizes the historic role organizations have played in the misappropriation of Indigenous art and culture. And as leaders in the ethical and responsible use of AI, TELUS believes Indigenous data sovereignty is crucial, with Indigenous peoples fully controlling and protecting their cultural heritage and artistic expressions. That's a pretty powerful example of this idea that reconciliation must be ongoing work, Herle You can learn more about the Declaration, view the art, and learn more about how you can appropriately support Indigenous artists at telus.com/responsible AI declaration. We have a clipping today from Mia Robson at the Canadian Press, and it's about tariffs on electric vehicles. Canada accused China of undermining global trade rules and flooding the market with electric vehicles Monday, as Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland kickstarted the process required to impose new import taxes on Chinese-made electric vehicles. Freeland said a 30-day consultation will begin July 2nd to investigate China's unfair market practices. But it seems clear that Freeland believes she already has the evidence she needs. Unifor President Lana Payne welcomed the Canadian move alongside Freeland Monday. A surge of low-cost EV imports from China will undermine everything being done right now to rebuild and grow a strong and truly national auto industry, said Payne. David Adams, president of the Global Automakers of Canada, said in a statement Monday he also backed the move. Conservative trade critic Kyle Seaback said in a statement that protecting the jobs of Canadian workers is his party's priority. Canada should not allow the dumping of cheap Chinese products into our country that threaten Canadian manufacturing jobs. So it seems like everybody from the right to the union movement is on board with this decision. Scott, the only thing I can think about when I see it, though, so whatever happened to climate? Whatever happened to the climate? Because Canadians are supposed to switch to EVs in like about 5 fucking years.
Yeah.
Right? And now we're putting 100% tariff on the most affordable EVs in the world. So making them much less affordable. So this is quite a tax on Canadians, actually.
Hey, man, not to mention, and I know we've got the EU and the United States, but doesn't this really put us into kind of trade Cold War terms where you've got gigantic trade blocks where we just are putting up huge trade walls? So that it's kind of just with what was seeming public endorsement, and as you say, broad consensus at the elite level, there seems to be this kind of just stumbling toward that. But it's a significant thing that's stumbling toward. I'm going to go really micro. My favorite thing about this story was the way that Doug Ford goes out last week. Right? And says, by God, they ought to put 100% tariff on the EVs. Now, call me cynical, but I thought that Doug Ford had Chrystia Freeland's cell phone and his phone, and they would call and they would be like, what you watching? Yeah, House of Dragon? How's it going? Okay, see you later, girlfriend. All this kind of bullshit. He totally fucked her. He was obviously informed that this decision was coming, and he decided to jump the parade, jump out in front, demand the thing that he knew was coming. And I don't give a shit, but it's kind of small ball. It was kind of a shitty short shooting of the bed on her. And what happened to the friendship? I think in a weird way, it's just another indication of where the government is kind of like, people are like, sorry, I got to walk past you to get done what I want to do. So our friendship doesn't matter as much. My fear that you could do something that might harm my interest, that's gone. Like, you guys are weak. You guys are in a weak position. And
I think you got it all wrong. You got it all wrong.
Okay, I got it all wrong. Doug was just inspired. He woke up one day and was thinking about Chinese EVs.
Friends. Let's hear it.
Because he reads the fucking news, and obviously no one in Ottawa
I do not
does.
believe that.
So here are the facts around this. There's been a tariff on Chinese EVs going back to Trump, and what happened? About a month and a half ago is Biden increased it to 100%. The Europeans have increased it to 100%. And so, it's not. You don't need a heads up from Ottawa to know what's going to happen in Canada. We're going to go through a renegotiation of NAFTA imminently, and there's going to be a choice of which side of the tariff wall we want to live on. Do we want to live on the side where we get trade with the United States, or do we want to live on the side where we get trade with China? I can tell you what is overwhelmingly important to the Canadian economy is to have trade with the United States. And China, not so fucking much.
Unless you're a canola producer.
Well, and look, my family are.
Right.
But there are other places in the world that will sell that canola to. But there is no trade with the United States unless we match the tariff wall against China around microprocessors, around EVs, around EV batteries. There is no fucking way we are in NAFTA if we do not do this. And the fact that Freeland is having a consultation on this instead of just following what the US and Europe have already done is a sign of ineptitude and weakness by the federal government. And so, did Doug Ford call for this? Absolutely fucking right he did, because what's important to the province of Ontario is trade with the United States, not trade with China. Sorry. As for the environment, the stupidity of the commitment to say we're all going to be moving to EVs right away is so obvious, not without about $1 trillion of investment in our electricity grid. Because if we all got one tomorrow and plugged it in, the whole thing would fall to the fucking ground. So, let's just be real about this.
Jordan?
I love it. Kory came prepared.
Yeah.
So I don't actually have a huge disagreement with anything folks have said so far, and more particularly with Kory. Actually, I think this is far less about the environment than it is about industrial and jobs policy. I think that's always been the case about Canadian investment in EVs. This is really about, and should, to a large degree, should be about manufacturing and the future of that industry here in Canada. And so when you think about the billions, and it's the scope of these investments is so we're coming close now to almost $50 billion that the feds have put in since 2020. You have to protect that investment, right? And to allow dumping of cheap EVs from China with unequal labor and environmental standards in production, on top of all the other things that Kory has talked about, in terms of aligning with our trade partners, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that to hold the integrity of the industrial policy, they have to do this. That's what it's going to take to create.
But is the industrial policy not in direct contradiction with the climate objectives?
Well, I don't think so. No, because the truth of the matter is that we will get to where we need to go on EVs just by a slightly different way, right? They're subsidizing the purchase of EVs that are not made in China through other means. So we can look at consumer side subsidies as another way around this. Costs will come down over time as well. I don't think it's fair to say that the only solution to meet that target is flooding the market with cheap Chinese EVs. I think that undermines some other really, really important goals of the policy over the long run. And you got to balance those things.
You can't do it, though. You can't do it without massive math. Massive is not the right word. What's a word that's 10x massive, 100x massive? That's the size of the investments that we need to make into our transmission grid and generation in order to actually go to that level of EV penetration in the market. That is going to take us a couple of decades to do. Yeah. And so,
whether we meet that timeline
it's a false choice. We'll get there, but it's a false choice to say, if EVs were free tomorrow, we couldn't do it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. So, it is something that you don't change from everyone using, one method of distributing energy being gas stations to another, which is, rapid charging stations. Because Stephen Guilbeault said so in a press release. It just doesn't work that way.
Kory, where's your faith in technology?
I will just add this, and I sound like a wank, so I transparently acknowledge that. I don't know. Maybe this is the right policy, and this is where we'll end up. And I'm certainly not defending the 30-day hesitation or consultation on the part of Freeland, but it's no small thing that we are rushing back toward a significant globally based protectionist impulse. It's no small thing. And, friendshoring is just kind of a, fancy, unhostile phrase for.
The ship sailed on this years ago.
We never had free trade.
What we had was we're moving toward a much.
What China had was a system of state sponsorship of industries and of massive theft of people's IP. They'll invite you
I'm
in
just
to
saying.
build one factory there, take your IP, and then fuck you over. That's the Chinese
But people
model.
always employ these
And
arguments in
that's
order
not
to
free
defend
trade.
protectionist
That's not free
impulse.
trade.
We are
Well, it's
moving
not free
toward a
trade.
decidedly more protectionist
You
world.
can't-
and we're
you-
bundling it up in a
Sure.
rationale called friendshoring and all this. And I'm just saying, that's
we're
what's going on.
acknowledging-
We should
we're
recognize it.
acknowledging reality instead of, high-minded liberal economic views on trade that are not backed up by the actual reality, what's going on in the marketplace.
Well, the number one barrier to EV
and they have to
adoption
weigh
is
the
cost.
consequences
It's nothing
of
else.
these
It's
policies for
cost.
jobs and for the industries here in Canada. Point. Like that's.
Well, my God,
that's-
you sound like a conservative arguing against climate policy generally. Oh my God, it's too expensive. We can't afford it. We shouldn't do it. All this kind of stuff. Here's the big picture as far as I'm concerned. I'm just going to say it for the third fucking time, which is climate change is a meteor heading toward the goddamned Earth. The Chinese are the global leaders in electrification, and we are going to fight them rather than harness it.
They're global leaders because they took the technology from Tesla.
We got to
Nothing.
find our own way there.
So, listeners of a certain age will remember the caboose. That weird red car at the end of the train that everyone recognized, but which remained a mystery. Every kid asked from every back seat, what's in the caboose? Railway workers had all sorts of names for it. Crummy, doghouse, hayrack, way car, brain box. At CN, our sponsor, the railroaders called it a cab. The caboose was the conductor's office and home. The conductor is responsible for the whole train except the locomotive. The conductor and the brakeman, his assistant, actually used to ride in the caboose, in the cupola, up top. Elsewhere in the caboose were benches, mattresses, a coal bin, a stove, a sink, water, and a fridge. Sadly, the caboose was eventually replaced by a small box of electronics. It works pretty well, but nobody's ever going to write a song about it. Anyway, now you know. A few other random things about CN. The first railway in Canada was built close to 200 years ago, in 1836, between a Montreal suburb and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. CN still operates on that short stretch of tracks. At the beginning of the 20th century, the various railroads operating in Canada basically went bankrupt. Under pressure to do something, the federal government consolidated them and formed CN. That was a bit more than 100 years ago. Since then, CN has helped build Canada. It's carried troops in wartime and immigrants to new homes in peacetime. It's hauled untold millions of tons, everything from grain to lumber to minerals. And it's been there to help during emergencies. It has basically moved the Canadian economy on its steel wheels. No wonder Gordon Lightfoot wrote that trilogy anthem. What a theme song. Oh, it's our national holiday in a week or so. The country is another year old. So, in the immortal words of Jean Chrétien, Happy Canada. Our last topic, little bit more fun for some people on the thing anyway. Naheed Nenshi. Holy fuck.
Speaking of meteors,
Speaking of meteors, absolutely. Enormous win. Massive win. A surprisingly large win. Nobody suspected it was going to be that big. Jordan, were you surprised by the margin and what accounts for it?
yes, I was surprised by the margin. I was surprised by the turnout also. Like that's
Huge.
that to me was really something. I mean, you sign up a lot of people in the leadership. I mean, maybe not 80,000, but you sign up a lot of people in the leadership race. You don't expect them all to turn out, but he did very well on that. I think, yeah, the margin is unbelievable, and the mandate is just, I think, unquestionable, incredibly powerful, all the adjectives. And I was surprised. I think, and it's interesting to me because I think sometimes, and we've talked about this before, that New Democrats get a bad rep as not being pragmatists. But boy, oh boy, when a clear path, when they see a clear offer about a path forward to winning, it is absolutely something that they take. And this I think that's what this is about. They've hired Nenshi for the job. The job is to defeat Danielle Smith. They see very clearly that he is the one most likely to do that by growing the appeal of the party in Alberta and inviting all of these new folks in. And I think the table is set very favorably for him to do that. I was, This is sort of like the old Bill Clinton quote that Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. Well, I think we're seeing a flip of that. And I think you're really going to see New Democrats in Alberta, even those who have some concerns about Nenshi and his ultimate designs for the party, they're going to fall in line because that mandate is so significant and what's on the table is so powerfully appealing that they feel that they've got a good vehicle to get there. I think, though, in a way, and actually Jason Markusoff had a really good piece about this, but this was the easy part for Nenshi. What comes next is going to be more challenging. So he has to now work in an environment that's really different from what he's used to. Of course, working in a caucus, learning to work with a team that's not entirely of his own making there. That's takes navigation. The New Democrat in Alberta, New Democrats is like very hard to kill. So I maybe don't share the same concern that you'll hear from some quarters about a complete ideological takeover, anything like that. I think that there will be a process where that stuff all finds its balance internally. But there's some pretty resilient strains of NDP in that party that are not going to go anywhere regardless of what happens with the affiliation with the federal party. So those are all conversations to come. Obviously, he's got to figure out where he's going to run. I do not think he's going to run in Lethbridge. That would be very crazy. So I think we're going to wait. We're going to see a Calgary run there, so everyone can just settle down about that. And then the other big thing is that, of course, he's coming to the table with a lot of baggage, right, for the UCP to take and to define him. So that is like protecting him from that onslaught and countering that effectively, I think is actually, besides the internal stuff, is really job one for his team. But this, to me, is really very good news overall for the party in terms of the enthusiasm and what it portends potentially for the next election there.
Scott, you're not the biggest fan of Naheed Nenshi, but obviously he got a lot of people excited and motivated through this race, which is not an easy thing to do in a leadership race, to actually get people. I mean, as Jordan said, these appear not to be names that were signed up against their knowledge. These are people that wanted to sign and wanted to come. Yeah. And what do you think he's doing right?
Well, let's start by offering the guy congratulations, right? So congrats on the race. Our friend Zane running the show there, they did a pretty impressive job. Turnout was high. Numbers were massive. So both the signups and the turnout of them, it's quite staggering in terms of the pure numbers. And there was no anybody but movement that materialized, which is almost shocking when you think about it, because he is an outsider. He comes in, says, hi, I've decided I'm going to be an NDPer for tomorrow in order to take over. And there was no real fundamental pushback. And nobody tried to organize their campaign around, we don't need this fucking guy or any of that. The size of the victory, as you say, I'm not always convinced that he's I know that people love him. I'm not sure that anybody loves him as much as he loves them. And I don't know that his ego needed this boost, to be honest. I think his self-confidence is probably running at a, locomotive height. But I think that what's so strong about him is that he brings name value and a sense that he could appeal beyond their base, so they could stretch their voter coalition because they're kind of trapped in the ridings they have and the demos they have. And so that's it. But there is a little whiff of Tom Mulcair here, right? Which is, we know you're not one of us. We are going out to hire you. You have a job. But he's got to complete the task. So as though he's riding high and all of that, this is a very transactional relationship between himself and his new party. It's, dude, you are rented for this purpose, so succeed. And it'll be interesting to see how he handles adversity, because I do think he's thin-skinned, and I don't think that he's shown that he can tolerate a lot of pushback. He was a darling as mayor for years and years and years, especially outside of Alberta. And it's going to be very interesting to see how he handles when people put the boots to him.
Kory, you know Alberta pretty well. How do you think he stacks up against Smith?
Poorly. I think if you're Smith, you're probably pretty happy. By the time he left as mayor, I think he had largely worn out his welcome with a lot of Calgarians. Not all Calgarians, obviously, but he's got a record. It's not great. I think all the things personality-wise that Scott mentioned, I think those are all there. I think Smith is one of the most talented political communicators in the conservative movement in Canada today. I think she's very good. I'm not sure he's that good. I think he has some of that chippiness that Scott's talking about. I think he, as mayor, as is the case for most mayors, it's not terribly competitive races when you're an incumbent mayor. You tend to be, running against no names. And so anyway, I think Smith's got a candidate with a record that's mixed, who's worn out his welcome in the one market that the NDP really need to break into, which is Calgary. And we'll see what happens. But I would be happy if I were Smith.
Just to stick with you, Kory, do you think he offers any opportunity in the seats that the NDP have not been competitive in recent elections, i.e. rural?
Is that a joke? No, I don't. I'm not going to take the bait on all the reasons why, but they're fairly obvious. Look, there's a reason why he's loved by more people on the left in large urban areas outside of Alberta than he is by people there. I think he's, I think both stylistically and substantively, he's not in keeping with sort of the values and motivations that you're going to find in rural ridings anywhere, particularly Alberta. I think he'll do well with the Globe and Mail editorial board and the Toronto Star editorial board. But last time I checked, folks in Lethbridge weren't spending a lot of time living their lives the way those two organizations want them to.
Hey, Jordan, let me come back to you. Let me come back to you. Now, I openly want to explore this with you, which is the break from the federal party side of it. Obviously, it's kind of awkward for him to be proposing it because he's not just have a history in the party. It might go down a little bit more easily if it was coming from somebody who'd established their NDP bona fides. Yeah. But isn't it the logical extension of the thinking that you were articulating, which is if you're serious about winning in Alberta, not only would I cut off from the federal party, I would think about changing the name. It is a clear drag, I think, to carry, other than in Ontario, to carry a national brand around, right? Yeah,
I think I have to say I'm a little agnostic on it in general. I think that there's an argument to be made for it from that exact perspective. But I also often think that the people who are making that argument overestimate what the impact of such a break would do. It's not as though Danielle Smith would suddenly wake up and say, oh my goodness, yes, of course, totally separate. I think that there's sometimes a lot attributed to that potential break that just wouldn't materialize in actual fact. And I mean, we can see this with other parties for years and years. The fact that the BC Liberals were named the BC Liberals certainly didn't prevent the BC NDP from going after them for ties with federal Conservatives. So, I think the mechanics of it is arguably a lot less important than the Alberta NDP and the Nenshi sort of finding their own personality within the progressive and the center-left sphere in Canada. And I think you can look ever so slightly eastward for a really good example, right? And the Manitoba NDP has traditionally been very good at this and continues to be really good under Premier Canoe, where they have plenty of disagreements with the federal party, but they're able to carve their own path and they've gained credibility on that because
Manitoba's a different jurisdiction, and the federal party is not as anathema to the mainstream of Manitoba as it is to the mainstream of Alberta, right?
Yeah, I think you're talking degrees though, rather than a fundamentally different thing. What's really important there is their ability to carve out a political space to operate at a distance from the federal party, to pick their fights with the federal party carefully, and to not have a hesitation to break when they need to. But I think the formal breakup is something, it's going to come to convention. People will have their say, but I do think it's a mistake. And this is like actually previewing my Hey You. I think it's a mistake to buy into the focus on that for Nenshi. Like that's a fight that opponents of the NDP are very keen to put in the window. And so if you're feeding that fight, that is actually taking away from the job that you were hired to do, to speak a little bit to what Scott was saying. And I do see some echoes of Tom Mulcair's election. I agree in this, although I think that the big difference here is the number of just the proportion of new members that were brought into the party for Nenshi is different, right? But I do think that when you're having this discussion, that is actually taking away from the job that you were hired to do. So you got to be really careful about how you engage and how you feed that narrative. There'll be a point where a decision is going to be made about that, but I think it's the wrong focus in the early days.
Having a federal affiliation is something that should be a thing of the past. And we can talk about BC United not working out the way they wanted, but it sure as hell worked for the Saskatchewan Party. It worked for the UCP. I think it's worked for the PC Party of Ontario. I think
it's been very good for the Parti Québécois over the years.
It's right, but like you can go on and on as you look through these things. But look, Merritt Stiles would be doing better in Ontario if Jagmeet Singh wasn't around. Absolutely, in every grain of research that I've looked at, he is a drag. He is a drag everywhere. Like we spent a lot of this podcast talking shit about Trudeau. Let's find 5 minutes here to talk shit about Jagmeet Singh, because he is a dead dog loser right now. And everything that we see in these numbers indicates that nationally, provincially, this by-election. But
he's safe as houses, Kory. He's safe as houses, because how does Jordan start off her comment on the by-election? We didn't expect to get many votes in that by-election anyway.
Yeah, well, that's just spin, and not particularly convincing spin. So, look, you can say that the Liberals are down the same amount as the NDP are down. Except, when you're typically at 18 points and you drop 7, it's a lot different than when you're normally at 55 and you drop 7. Okay?
Well, look, here's what I'll say about
3rd of your fucking vote.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think that what we're seeing here, it's really difficult also to separate Singh's numbers, his personal numbers right now, and the confidence and supply agreement. We are seeing a drag on his personal numbers because of his close affiliation with Trudeau. So I think it's hard to say
it's much
what
more
happens
than that.
when you create that distance, because, before Kory romps to victory on this, the fact actually that the NDP vote is holding steady, as I've said before, in such a polarized environment is actually very significant. You would expect to see a strong bleed to the Liberals in this environment in order to block a polarizing conservative leader, and we are simply not seeing that. So I actually think that there's some resilience there in the underlying NDP numbers that could shift.
He's the one who decided to make a deal with the devil, right? Like, sure. How is that not his leadership? He decided to do a coalition agreement.
This would be the second time in 15 years that a tremendous NDP success results in a large conservative majority government.
Right. Yeah. Except the last.
Well, and if only we didn't live in a multi-party parliamentary democracy with first past the post, we could also talk about lots of other things, guys. But that's where we live, right?
Right.
And so I think that I would not pass judgment on his numbers until we start to see what they might be like in the absence of the confidence and supply agreement. As we move ahead closer to an election.
I do feel like he's poised to suddenly blast across the Canadian political landscape and seize people's imagination and votes.
Jordan, that is incredible as Team Trudeau coming and saying, like, people aren't ready to make a decision yet. Like, how much evidence do you need? Like, the guy has halved the seats of the party once. He's about to do it again. He's down in the polls. He is a fucking anchor. An anvil on the ankle of every NDP provincial party that's trying to swim. It's, how much more evidence is required? Like, I just don't get it. That just sounds like
I don't know.
She's just not saying it. I'm betting $5 right now that Jordan dreams of slitting that guy's throat. That's my bet.
Well,
I'm betting $5 that you dream of slitting that guy's throat.
Show.
I'm not buying what Kory's selling.
Yeah. Spin on, sister.
All right.
Whatever.
Hey, yous. Who's got one?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Well, I'll just continue because it's very linked to what we were talking to. It's first, it's Teneycke and the team, which is really a heartfelt congratulations for such a what I think will become a legendary victory. And now the hard part. So I got two pieces of advice, one for Teneycke and his team and one for the rest of Alberta New Democrats. And so for Teneycke and his team is don't be sucked into that defensive fight about splitting with the federal NDP. Do you see these people on my screen? They want you to have this fight. Don't go there. It's going to come up at the convention. People will have their say, but don't lead with that. You got to stay focused on Danielle Smith. You've got a great mandate here. Consolidate within your caucus. You're doing, you've made some great choices, I think, for deputy leader and moving ahead. I think you can build on some of that. You can pull people in. Stay focused on that in the early days. Don't get sucked into this. It's a weak, insecure argument that puts the party, it puts your party on the defensive. So don't live there. And then my advice is for some of the Alberta New Democrats who have mixed feelings about this. And my advice is don't be weird. Don't do the weird purity test thing. It doesn't serve the party. It doesn't serve the project of beating Danielle Smith. This is exciting. There are many more people who are now open to considering the Alberta NDP, and that's nothing but good news. So a big congratulations to Teneycke and his team, and I do wish them all the success.
There you go. Hey, you. All right. Scott, what do you got?
Well, my hey you goes out to Leslie Church. I just feel bad, and I just want to say you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the wrong circumstance. I do happen to believe that the Conservatives tried to win that riding. I think they went after it hard. I don't think that you leave anything on the field when you're Jenny Byrne. And, we all went to bed thinking that Leslie had won by a hair, and it turned out she lost by a hair. Uprooted her life, moved back to Toronto, spent months knocking on doors, doing everything as right as she could. We may have quarrels about the messaging, but that's a hell of a sacrifice to make, and it's got to be a hell of a hard day today. And not only do you not win, but you have to listen to the whole country, including jackasses like us, pick it apart and talk about its national significance for fucking days and weeks on end. So
you don't actually have to listen to us.
No, I suspect many don't. But anyway, thoughts.
I really recommend throwing your phone in a lake, actually, and.
I've not run, and I ain't gonna. So hats off to those who do.
God help us if we ever run for office.
Scott, the addendum to you, oh my God. The addendum to your remarks are that Leslie should be allowed to run in the general, in that riding.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Kory.
I'm going to throw my hey you to Scott Moe. We didn't get to talking about this, but there was a really weird town hall meeting in Spears, Saskatchewan. And Spears, I had to look it up because, I
didn't bring this up, Kory, because I didn't even want people outside of Saskatchewan to know about this. I was hoping they'd never hear about this.
This is a deep cut.
I guess we have to do a little bit of an explainer. The premier, who is a friend of mine and who I am very fond of. I'm sure I'm the only person on this podcast who could say that. I genuinely have a lot of time for Scott Moe on many, many things. But he went to a town hall in a very small town in this riding. The population, according to Wikipedia, is 72 people. It makes young Saskatchewan and Prelate look like thriving metropolises by comparison.
Absolutely.
Why he was at this meeting, which sounds like it was not really a community meeting. It was like a place where a meeting was held from people around the riding and elsewhere. But it was kind of a litany of oddball conspiracy theories that were brought to the microphone. And I don't know whether he felt trapped or what the situation is, but He ended up tied up in, committing to look into chemtrails and things like that, which are the kookiest of the kooky conspiracy theories that you find in the dark recesses of the internet. I think that Scott has got to tighten up his game a bit. Like, I think this is one of a number of fumbles. None of them, hugely serious, in and of themselves. And I don't think this is hugely serious in and of itself. But I think it speaks to a sloppiness around politics. And I think that catches up to you when you've been in office as long as they have. I think they need to tighten up their game. I think they need to not just assume the election is won because they're ahead in the polls. I think they need to tighten up their game because you do enough sloppy little errors and it starts adding up into a big error and people making a big decision about your government that you don't want to have them make. So, hey, Scott, tighten it up.
We could do a weird thing about Saskatchewan every week. Next week, we'll talk about the Chamber of Commerce recommending lowering the working age to 13.
Well, it was younger than that for me on the Teneycke farm.
Yes, I was going to say, small hands are good for, operating the farm machinery. That's my understanding.
My AU goes out to Justin Trudeau. One more year as Prime Minister or a future for the Liberal Party. That's your choice. Going to be interesting to watch it. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching or listening to our show. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and of course, my 3 colleagues here who showed up Tuesday morning, no matter what condition they were in from last night. Talk about this. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next week with more of this, whatever it is.